Hi everybody, this is Alchemist2 and I'm back again with another book review. Probably wondering why the heck I have a red nose on my nose. Well, it's Red Nose Day, and this was actually given to me by Sarah. Thank you very much. I'm not going to wear it for the whole review because I sound like I have a terrible cold, but anyway, if you don't know what Red Nose Day is, it is a fundraising activity where comedians from all walks of life and different entertainers from all over the world, well, they have it in the UK. The UK, I think, is where it gets the most attention, but they have it here over in the States too, and the money will go to helping kids and whatnot, but it's a good cause. But nevertheless, it was really itching. I mean, I like the nose. It's got glitter and everything, and I love glitter. I'm a big fan of that, but the book that I read, it's called Broadway. History of New York in 13 Miles by Fran Layden. And it's actually quite fascinating. It talks about how the Mets were formed, how the New York Yankees were formed, and how New Yorkers adapted. And we all know the origin itself coming from the Dutch settlers that came and called it New Amsterdam, and it all began in the 1800s, and then there was a part of New York itself that used to exist. It was, I think it was Spanish Harlem. I don't know, I can't quite recall, but this is where West Side Story was shot, and it no longer exists now. It's lost to antiquity and history. At one point in time, there was a delineation between the rich and the poor. When it was mapped out, they had the Shilling Street and then they had the Dollar Street. And it was pretty obvious who came from what side of the street. It was interesting. Here they talk about this asylum near 86, north of 86th Street. It splits into two strands, and it was, I forget what they said about that particular asylum, that they had a necropolis too, because at the time the necropolis was severely overpopulated with dead, and the reason for this was because of consumption and tuberculosis and whooping cough and yellow fever and cholera and dropsy, which was also known as edema. Consumption, I think, was tuberculosis, if I'm not mistaken. But the diseases of the day, mainly tuberculosis and yellow fever, were the ones that, and cholera, well, those were the main big three that devastated, just completely devastated New York and its inhabitants. And a lot of residents didn't live beyond their first birthday. I thought, ooh, that's rough, because they didn't have the medical science to deal with such things. But it's really beautifully written, and of course talks about how Broadway became an Indian trail. Was Broadway an Indian trail to begin with? It became an Indian trail. Which is, I thought, that's kind of an irony in and of itself. And it talked about how people made Broadway what it really was, and it went through quite a bit of changes over time, and really this is absolutely fascinating stuff. I love history because of this. But if you're like me and you like history and you want to learn a little bit about America, which I don't think a lot of us do, unfortunately, I'm going to be completely honest, because I know more about Europe than I do America. But I'm going to read the leaflet because it speaks better than I can. In the early 17th century, in a backwater Dutch colony, There was a wide, muddy cow path that the settlers called the Broadway. As the street grew longer, houses and taverns began to spring up alongside it. What was once New Amsterdam became New York. Well, we know that. And the farmlands gradually gave way to department stores, theaters, hotels, and finally the perpetual traffic of the 20th century's Great White Way. And it talks quite a bit about the Great White Way and why it was called the Great White Way. From Bowling Green all the way to Marble Hill, Broadway takes us on a mile-by-mile journey up America's most vibrant and complex thoroughfare through the history of the heart of Manhattan. Today, Broadway almost feels inevitable, but over the past 400 years, there have been thousands who have tried to draw and erase its path. Following their footsteps, we learn why one side of the street was once considered more fashionable than the other. That part was very interesting. Witness the construction of Trinity Church, the Flatiron Building, and the Ansonia Hotel. Watch the burning of P.T. Barnum's American Museum. Yeah, that was. They actually talk about how there were freak shows at the time that were more common than what PT had a curio. That's what he developed. He developed a curio, and PT became known for advertising and marketing, and he was a whiz at it. And if you've seen The Greatest Showman, you know why that was, and that was actually very accurate in the film. Talks about the burning of the curio. We discovered that Columbia University, it was built on the site of an insane asylum. Oh yeah, I remember the asylum part. Along the way, we meet Alexander Hamilton, Emma Goldman, Edgar Allan Poe, John James Audubon, he had a French accent, but they considered him very American despite that. And Hamilton, that part was very intriguing too. You know, he was shot by Aaron Burr, and everybody was shocked by it, but I think people were really rooting for him. I kind of wonder if there was an alternate history, what would have happened if we did have Alexander as president. That would have changed a lot of things, I think. And then it goes on. Impresarios, politicians who helped turn Broadway into a cultural spine of America. Very commercial as well. It traces the physical and social transformation of an avenue that has been both a path of progress, a street of broken dreams. Ain't that the truth? Especially for people who are just wanting to go into acting. Boy, Broadway can be cutthroat, from what I hear. Of course, you have to go to acting school, and just because you've gone to acting school does not guarantee you're going to get into Broadway. And even when you do get into Broadway, people are really they are scrutinizing you the moment you walk up on that stage, and they talk quite a bit about that too. Mr. Leedon does. He's an architect. He's the author of the 5th edition of the AIA Guide to New York. Oh, so he's a native. He's a native of Gainesville, Florida. That's interesting. Why would a native of Gainesville write about New York? That's just interesting in and of itself. He teaches at the City College of New York. Oh, he lives in Brooklyn. Okay. So he's from Florida, but he lives in New York, so technically he is a native of New York. But this is so neat on the back. I like the illustrations. I love that, and the different pictures throughout. I want to go to Broadway so bad, and look at all those people. Yeah, I really enjoy the photos. And I don't know why I've always enjoyed old photographs like daguerreotype. It talks about the daguerreotype studios that they had when they were just becoming vogue and people were really getting into it. It was all new when they were just figuring out how they could use photography and everything. But that's about all I have to say about Broadway. So until next time, live long and prosper. Ciao, Titi.